Welcome back, everyone, to our NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here at Neat Pit Gaming. So today's video is going to be all about Chicagoland Speedway. Now, this is a track that I had run very recently in career mode, so I decided since I'd already had the beginnings of a truck set up, why not go ahead and finish that out with all three of the series and go ahead and release the video. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to start out by taking a look at the truck setup, then we'll move on to Xfinity and the Cup Series before finally ending the video with a short gameplay footage of a, I believe, 11 lap race using the Cup cars at Chicagoland against maximum difficulty AI. So with that being said, let's go ahead and head to the track. Before we get into discussion of the setup itself, let's talk a little bit about the track and about lap times. There's not a whole lot to talk about with the track. It's mostly smooth, so not a whole lot of bumps to worry about. The only bumps really are at the entrance of turn 1 and turn 3, but you'll find that after a few laps, you'll basically forget about those as well. So that'll take care of the track itself. You can run this thing wide open, so there's really no need to worry too much about the line. You're going to run out by the wall on the straightaways and down as close as you can to the bottom in the corners for the best lap time. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about those lap times. In the trucks, I run about a 31 flat to a 31.1, again, just depending on what line I'm running and also whether or not there's a draft on the track. You have to keep in mind the lap times I generally give you are alone on the track. I'm not interested in giving you times with the draft because they can vary. And so if you're catching up to another car coming up behind them and closing in on them quickly, then yeah, you can definitely pick up some time. So about 31 seconds flat for the trucks. Xfinity cars are about 30.3, 30.4, somewhere in that range. And the Cup cars are in the 29.2, 29.3 second range. And again, those will fluctuate whether you're in and out of traffic and also what line you choose to run around the track. Now, you can run at least 3 grooves around this track. Again, it's always wide open. The only time you might want to breathe the throttle would be when you're in traffic around the AI, simply because you never know exactly where they're going to go. But for the most part, you're going to be wide open, and you'll see that at the end of the video in the gameplay footage, which will be in the Cup car. Now let's move on to the setup and talk about the truck setup. Now, I will tell you that this is the exact same setup I use for the Xfinity cars as well. So keep that in mind. And that's all the way down to the gear settings. We'll start off by talking about the shocks. There was really no bumps to speak of, so I left the shocks at 10s across the board. As always, feel free to adjust that and see how it may benefit the handling and or your speed. Moving on to the weight settings, left side weight is maxed out as always because we're on an oval turning left. Nose weight or front weight is at 50.3%. This is the one thing that if you were going to adjust some things, this would be the first thing I would adjust under normal conditions, and it's simply because it's very easy to adjust. If the car or truck in this case is a little bit too loose, wants to over rotate, a quick setting that you can adjust is front weight. Move a little bit of weight to the front to 50.5 or even all the way up to 51.0 just to see how it changes the handling. It definitely should tighten it up. Wedge is at 51% even, and that is, again, just to give it a little bit of feel in the wheel. This game doesn't have very strong force feedback, so any feedback I can get from the wheel is definitely welcome. Front and rear ride height are at the minimums, so nothing to see there. Moving on to the front springs, 1,200 pounds on the left front, 1,000 pounds on the right front. Again, if you feel that the truck or car is having a hard time turning, then feel free to reduce the right front spring. That can help out some. Also, reducing the front weight can help. If you feel that the car or truck is a little bit too loose, particularly on entry, then if it's loose entry to center of the corner, then go ahead and increase that right front spring and or decrease the left front spring, and that should definitely help out. The rear springs at 350 and 500, and that should get you through the corner, particularly from the center of the corner off, without getting too terribly loose. But if you do get loose, particularly on exit, then one of the things you can do is increase that left rear spring a little bit, and that should definitely help out. Tire settings are roughly at the proper inflation, but feel free to play around with these. If you increase the difference between the left side pressures and the right side pressures, which now is at about 7 PSI, if you increase that, then the truck or car will want to rotate a little bit more. If you decrease the difference between the left and right side pressures, then the car will be a little bit tighter and won't want to rotate quite as much. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings, our camber is, as always, maxed out at 10 on both, and this is because it gives us maximum grip and maximum speed in the corners. I actually wish that the game wouldn't allow us this without the negative consequences that come with running this much camber, but it does not, so we'll continue to run it. Front sway bars at 1.15 inches, and that is generally just to let the car rotate. If you feel the car is getting too loose, then increase this number. If you feel the car needs to turn a little bit better, then there's still some room to decrease the front sway bar. As usual, I don't use the rear sway bar, so we'll move on from that. But again, if you are having trouble with the rear of the car wanting to be too tight and not wanting to rotate as much, feel free to try out using the rear sway bar setting. Left and right side track bar are both set at 10 inches. This is a number that worked out good. I didn't really need a split in the rear of the truck or the Xfinity car simply because it was rotating quite nicely and I didn't need any help in that area. So again, if you feel like the truck is getting a little bit too loose on you, then decrease these numbers. And if you feel like you need a little bit more rotation, then you can increase the left or the right side track bar to get the desired effect. Brake bias really isn't needed here. The only difference, only real reason to use it would be if you're in traffic or when you're coming in for green flag pit stops, and that's the reason why I generally use between 70% and 75% just to give enough front brake to keep from getting too loose under those circumstances. Grill tape, I skip right over it. That should be the default setting of 20%, so I just leave it at default, whatever it is for that particular series, because it really doesn't do anything that I can tell. And if it makes any difference at all, it's extremely minor, so I just don't spend a lot of time with it. We'll move on to the wheel lock and steering offset. Again, these are my standard settings, and they seem to work really good at all the tracks for me. But of course, that may be a little different for you. The wheel lock is intended to help with sensitivity of the steering. So if you need the wheel to be more sensitive, then decrease the wheel lock. If you need the wheel lock, or excuse me, if you need the steering to be more sensitive, then decrease that number. If you need it to be less sensitive, then increase this number. So moving on to the steering offset, this is intended to offset the amount of pull to the left that you receive on the straightaways, but be careful about going too high with this number because the car or truck can actually start to pull to the right on the straights, and we definitely don't want that. We'll move on finally to the gear settings. And as normal, I have not messed with first through fourth gear. I concentrate entirely on the rear end ratio unless something is just way out of line on first through fourth gear. And generally, it's good enough. It's passable for what I need. Rear end ratio here at 3.25. This will keep you somewhere around 8,500 RPMs maximum. Again, that's a rough figure. So it gives you plenty of room. If you want to increase the RPMs, then simply increase this number to 3.3, maybe even to 3.4 if you've got enough room before the rev limiter. And also on the other side of things, you can reduce this number if you are interested in lowering the RPMs. Who knows, you might pick up a little bit of time by playing around with the gearing. But again, this is the setup that I use for both the trucks and Xfinity. Now we'll move on to the Cup cars and see what changes I've made there. Now that we spent some time in the truck garage looking at the setup that I use for the truck and Xfinity, I wanted to actually bring you into the Cup garage and show you the few adjustments that I made between the original setup for trucks and Xfinity and the Cup cars. You can see it's very quickly at a glance, it's largely the same. A couple of things I do want to point out though is the difference in front weight. You can see that I've moved weight forward, and that's because you're running much faster here than you are in the trucks or Xfinity. So I need a little bit more stability. You actually can use the same setup that I was using and showed you earlier for the trucks and Xfinity. But what I found is the difference is I'm spending a lot of time turning to the right in the corners, and I just didn't want to do that as far as releasing a setup to you guys. But feel free to try it out. If you want moving some weight to the front, as I've done here to 51.0 from the previous setting of 50.3 or 50.5, It just simply stabilizes the car, particularly on the entry and center of the corner, keeps it from getting too loose. Also, you'll notice another big change is on the right front spring. I've increased that to 1,100 pounds, and that's for the same reason. It helps to stabilize the car on corner entry, particularly, and also helps it keep it from getting too terribly loose. The final thing I'll point out here is on the gear setting. And you notice that it is at 3.10. Again, this is to keep the RPMs about around 8,500 max RPMs, give or take a little bit. So it does give you some room to increase this number to get more RPMs or decrease this number to get fewer RPMs. So that'll do it for our Cup setup. Again, largely the same as the trucks and Xfinity. Now stay tuned for some gameplay footage of the Cup cars here at Chicagoland in a short race. I believe 11 laps on that. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here on Knee Pit Gaming.